We need to get to a performance, so.
You are live.
I'd like to call the meeting to order tonight. Can you have roll call, please?
Councilmember Wilson. Here. Councilmember Black is absent. Councilmember Derringer.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Piper is absent, and Mayor Mersch.
Here. Thank you very much. The pledge, well, I have such a, B?
Oh, sure.
How about if you'll do the pledge for us
Yes,
tonight?
all right. All right, ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, approve the, we have no presentations or proclamations or announcements that I know of.
No?
Approve the order of the agenda.
Move to approve.
Second,
All in favor?
aye.
Blue folder items, seeing none, I would move. Do we have any public, oh, this is wonderful. Do we have any public comment on non-agenda items?
You can do it.
Number 8, the consent calendar. What are your wishes?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Okay, moving right along. Commission
Good, on the
items,
second
none. Public hearings, none. Old business, none. And new business, I see Robert's already assumed the position.
He's ready.
Yeah, that has a different context in law
Well,
enforcement, though.
well,
You know?
well. So, our subject is fiscal year, excuse me, 2023-24 mid-year report for the 6 months ended December 31st, 2023.
Yes.
Right.
While that's forming up, I'll just start with some introductory comments. First, it's good to be back. It's been a while. Last
We
time I was
thought you
here.
didn't love us anymore.
Yeah. Yes. So, so this is for the mid-year. We're looking at the first 6 months of the year. And as last year, the same story is, when we start looking at the numbers, the first quarter, there's not a lot of meaningful things you can glean from the numbers, in terms of comparing to budget, no trends that you can really identify. But 6 months, you can start to see some trends. Certainly, the more time that passes by, the more information, more sort of sense you get as to how you might end the year. But this is the first kind of real look, and we do a pretty good analysis of revenues and expenditures and how we're doing so far. As you probably saw in your binder and your staff report, there's a pretty, I tend to be wordy at times, but there's probably a 9-page, if not more, analysis where I go through in much more detail than I'm going to do here. Revenues of the general fund, expenditures, evaluating and analyzing and discussing the variances and the like. Again, I'm not going to go into that level of detail, but it's there for you. Hopefully you had a chance to take a look at that, but certainly any questions that come up at that level of detail, I'm happy to answer. And also wanted to give you some context, because you may recall last year at this time, we were dealing with an already identified structural deficit. Remember, we were upside down, but we were a deficit of somewhere in the $200,000 to $250,000 range. And because of that, the mid-year report was followed immediately with kind of like the budget process, because we wanted to figure out how are we going to solve that structural balance. We had a number of options before us, but and ultimately we did solve it through eliminating the subsidy to the refuse fund. But we don't have that this year. We are balanced. We adopted a balanced budget. Actually, we had a small surplus that we helped to pay for most of our capital program. So as as we're looking at this, we don't have that same sense of urgency that we're trying to figure that out. If all things hold, like we hope they will, then we are going to start next year with a pretty balanced budget. And it's just a matter of what kind of capital we want to do, how we might want to tweak the numbers a little bit. But for the most part, we're not dealing with a structural imbalance as we were last year. So that's good. So we'll start with the revenues. I already kind of went through this. So these are the revenues. Again, I'm not going to go through all of them, just to kind of highlight a few, but the thing to point out is that through the middle of the year, if you look at the bottom right corner, we are trending below budget. And I'm going to get into some of the reasons for that, but that's kind of where we're at today. And I'm going to show you at the end of this, or toward the end of this, more formal projection where I think we might end the year, just based on what we know today. Now, I will say that the first column, of course, is what was adopted, and we never adjust the revenues like we do for expenditures. We have amendments and the like, but the budget for revenues is always static. What I do is, just for purposes of comparing to half the year, I take half of that budget, and that's the pro rata budget. So if you look at something like C&D permits, the pro rata budget toward the middle is $2,800, which is half of the $5,600 that's adopted. So it's just kind of a guide. It's not precise because not all revenues come in exactly, evenly throughout the year, but they generally tend to. The one exception is the first item, which is property taxes. You'll see an asterisk there in the report that there's a note that says that. For that one, I looked at the prior 3 years to see how much do we typically get through mid-year, because it doesn't come in evenly, and it tends to be more weighted toward the second half of the year. That's where we see more of the revenues. So just to kind of take half the budget and compare to where we're at is going to look like we're really behind. We are a little bit behind, but when I just took the average of the last 3 years, and I said, well, what do we typically get? And that's how I came up with that pro rata budget of $659. So when we compare our property taxes to that, again, we're slightly below, trending below, and we'll see why in a moment. But otherwise, it's just comparing to half the budget and our actuals to show variances. So this is our property
Robert,
taxes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So everything else besides the property taxes is 50% of budget?
Yes, because it's half of the year, take half the budget.
But this one is what percent of budget then?
It works out to be that we typically collect about 44% of our revenues for the first bathroom. So I took 44% of the adopted budget, and that's the number of 659.
Okay, so if you did the 50%, then the unfavorable variance would be much more
Would be
than
substantial,
50,000.
yeah, and it would be untrue, it would be overstated in my opinion.
All right, thank you.
Sure. So one of the things I wanted to show you is that when we develop the budget for the year, like when we developed it for this current year, we really finalize those numbers essentially in May. We don't really know we don't wait till June 30 or even July, because some of the numbers that come in July relate to the prior year. We have to make an estimate. And what we projected toward the end of last year was $1,425,000. So we projected that at the end of last year, we would get $1,425,000. Well, in reality, we didn't get that. We didn't see the kind of revenues we typically see in June, July, and August, so we ended up being short. So our actual revenues last year were $1,380,000. So, $70,000, what was that, $45,000 below budget or our projections. But we built our current year budget on the 1,425, right? So we assumed a 5% growth. So to the right, you see the budget for the current year. We added 5% to the year in projection. It came up with 1,496, and that's what our current adopted budget for property taxes is. But because we really ended the year 1,380, if we grow 5% like we assume, we'd only achieve 1,449. We would have to. It's actually closer to 8%. We'd have to achieve an 8% growth to meet budget this year because we sort of started the year behind already. It's possible we would achieve that. We'd have to get, 8% growth would be kind of unusual, obviously. Maybe 6% is attainable, but I think 5% is a good number. So I'm expecting we're going to be short somewhere around whatever that is, $46,000, $47,000 by year end. Not a lot, but still, it's a shortfall. Does that make sense? Why I'm projecting that? Okay. So that's essentially why we're kind of below budget at this point. So property transfer tax, just to remind you of what that is, anytime there's a sale, a real estate sale, there is a tax that's imposed. Some people call it a documentary tax, but it's a transfer tax. And we get 55 cents on every $1,000 of value that's sold. So I'm going to just tell you real quick, if you go to the bottom, what we got so far this year through December, 31,000, that represents about $57 million of sales in the first half of the year. But I wanted to point out, because I've said this before, that the real property transfer tax is dependent upon volume, sales volumes, right? The more sales, the more we get. And as you know, starting last year, when the interest rates started going up, we started to see volumes go down dramatically in LA County. I don't know exactly what it was in Rolling Hills, but countywide, the numbers were in the 30 to 40% decline. So big numbers, just because of the impact of interest rates. The interest rates before they started increasing them were at a range of 0% to 0.25%. That was the Fed funds rate, which is short-term rate, overnight money. Since March of 22, they raised them 11 times, the rates, and they raised them by in total 5.25. So today they're 5.25 to 5.5. That's the current interest rate. And of course, mortgage rates are tied to that, and any other debt is borrowed tied to that. COVID hit in March of 2020. Just to kind of show you the history of what the revenues were in 20, we got 48,000, almost 49,000. In 21, we got 132. And then in 22, we got 80, and then 23, 57,000. Now, I think there's a correlation between rising interest rates and volume, and therefore real property transfer tax. So I think that's what we're seeing. The good news is our adopted budget anticipated that it would continue to stay flat, and we adopted a budget of 56,000. So far this year, for the half of the year, we've gotten 31,000. So we're trending a little better, but it's not going to be approaching the 132 we saw in fiscal year 2021. Building another permit revenue. I've mentioned to you before in the past that one of the great things about the revenue sort of portfolio of Rolling Hills is that its largest revenue is property taxes, and property taxes historically have been very, very stable. If you think of cities like where I come from, Santa Barbara, that sales tax and bed tax, they're very dependent on the economy or susceptible to economic swings. So we were seeing dramatic ups and downs, and we're always having to deal with that. Property taxes don't have that volatility, which is great. It also means that you're not going to see these huge upswings that's going to help build up your reserves or restore reserves. But building and other permit revenue is the one revenue that you have. It's not super huge, but it's significant. That does kind of go up and down with the economy. It has variability like that, like a sales tax might have. And it also is dependent upon interest rates or impacted by interest rates. So, we saw back in 21, after I think 3 years before or 4 years before that, we were in the $700,000 range, and then we started to see it come down and maybe impacted by COVID. So we hit a nadir of 183,000. But then it started to grow, and we saw 518 the next year, and then last year we've seen the most recent peak of the last 4 years of 578. And by the way, last year there were 155 building permits issued. So this year, based on last year's projections, we adopted a budget of $600,000. But so far this year, halfway through, we've only realized 183,000. Now, that's 5 months of revenue because the county is always late in sending us the money. But if you just extrapolated 5 months for half the year, it's 225. That's still fairly well below the 300, half the budget, 300,000. Through December, we've issued 60 building permits. And apparently last year we had about 79. So we're definitely trending toward fewer building permits being issued. Not sure why. Is it finally, interest rates catching up? I mentioned to you before that I was concerned about interest rates affecting this revenue, and last year really didn't. But this year, maybe that's what's happening. And, John has been trying to research the data. It's hard to figure it out because it comes from the county and from Wildan. And, do we know how many are in the pipeline? No. We just know how many are issued, and we are down in terms of number of permits issued this year. And it looks like they're pretty sort of steady throughout the year. So I would not be surprised if we fell under budget. Maybe if we hit 500,000, it'd be great. But certainly that's something we have to pay attention to. The good news on some of this is that, at least on a positive side, we have some interest in investments that are trending better than in our budget. So just some recent trends in 21, 22, and this excludes our Section 115, the PARS money we have that's invested sort of differently for pensions and OPEBs and all that. But this is just the interest that we have between our CDs and LAIF. In 21, 22, we got 26,000. Of course, interest rates were a lot lower back then. In 22, 23, we got $96,000, and I'll talk about more than that in a moment. So based on that, we adopted a budget of 110. So far this year, halfway through the year, we're at 72,000, so definitely trending more higher than the 110. I expect that we're going to hit 150 or close to that. Two main reasons, and we've talked about this before. I did this about a year ago, and I did it again more recently, where we're shifting money out of LAIF that's paying really low interest rates to CDs. And CDs, because of this inverted yield curve, that's what's going on. I'll show you in a moment. The short-term rates are better than the long-term rates, so it's just shifted $1.25 million from LAIF into CDs, and we've been able to see higher levels of interest return based on that. When I first did it, LAIF was earning 0.5%, and we were able to get immediately from that money 4 to 4.5% in CDs in 3 months, 6 month CDs. And then so just generally, that we're starting to see an increase in interest rates. So LAIF is even now at, I think, closer to 2% or 3%. So we're just generally seeing that. So that's kind of the two reasons why we're seeing higher interest earnings. But it's mostly because of the shift from LAIF to CDs. And for those of you who are into this kind of stuff, like I am, this might be boring, but I sort of picked 3 dates. January of 2022, that's when, before interest rates started going up, you can get 0.5%, 0.5% on a 1 month and 2% in a 30-year security. And then in November, almost a year later, it's the first time that it flipped, that the short-term money, 1 month, was higher than 30 years. So you can get more on a 1 month CD than you could on a 30-year bond, which is crazy. And then, just recently, it's 4.7. That's the biggest spread, 4.7 in the 1 month to 3.62. So that's what I capitalized on to try to take advantage of the shorter rates and higher yielding CDs just by going only 6 months versus just having it parked in a LAIF where it takes a longer time to get the higher yields. So this is kind of my first projection of where we would end the year. And for the most part, I just kind of doubled the where we're at mid-year. But for others, I did a little more analysis. But if you just kind of cut to the chase at the bottom, based on just information through December 31st, it looks like we're going to be in the $2,576,000 range. Budget to very far left of $2,762,000. So we could be short somewhere around a little less than $200,000 by the end of the year, unless we see something dramatic change with building permits and the like. I don't think we're going to see much of a variance in property taxes unless something dramatic happens there. So it's going to be really close to this number that I'm projecting, give or take, $50,000 to $100,000.
Robert, earlier on, you said that last year at this time, we were projecting I think a $250,000 deficit, and you called that a structural deficit. And this is your estimate, we'll be at 121,000?
Yeah, so not quite. This is just one side of the ledger, right? So let's look at the other side, expenditures, because that's going to have a bearing on that answer.
And I'm sorry, Robert, before you go on, is it possible that you could have this available to us as well? I don't see that in the package.
Sorry.
So
I tend to end of work, that's the last thing I work on, but we'll send it to you.
I understand, but it's good information as we're going through the budget building process. So if we could
Happy
have a
to.
copy of that, I'd appreciate it.
right after the meeting.
Thank you.
So now on the other side of the ledger, the expenditure side, so you could see, this is by department. In your packet, you have every single line item that makes up the general fund and all the other funds. I just kind of try to highlight by department so you can kind of see how it rolls up that way. And what I also wanted to point out is that this is really an important distinction, because we talked about this before, that there's a fundamental difference between the operating budget, which is sort of the first section where you see total operations being totaled, versus capital. Particularly when we start defining do we have a structural deficit or are we structurally balanced, we don't really talk about capital in that regard, because capital comes from reserves. It's one time, you have discretion, but it's the ongoing cost versus the ongoing revenues that sort of define whether you're balanced or not, right? So that's why I kind of like to subtotal it between, to distinguish between operations and capital transfers. Because the capital transfers are big dollars and they do consume our reserves, but they're not ongoing. So in total, to look at total operations, our favorable variance through the middle of the year is 161,213. Everybody see that? Now, I'm not expecting that number to double, because the reason primarily that we have this variance is because if you look at city administrator's budget, we see a variance of 153,000. That's because we had 3 out of the 4 positions that are in that budget being vacant at some point during the first half of the year. I think the city administrator position was vacant for 4 months. We had the administrative assistant position vacant, that we have an analyst, the management analyst position. So that's why we see the variance, but because those positions are going to be filled, we're not going to see that kind of a variance the second half of the year. But, that's money in the bank, though, at least for now. So if I were going to make a guess, I think we'd end the year in operations in the 250 range, probably. So that's kind of speaks to your question in terms of the actual results. We're going to see probably enough savings on the expenditure side to kind of cover our revenue, shortfall. So might end up in the year sort of balanced, right, on an actual basis. And I'll show you what the budget looks like because with all amendments, but on an actual basis, we will end up pretty much balanced. We're not going to see any huge surpluses that are going to help build up reserves, nor are we going to see, in my opinion, any huge deficits that's going to draw on reserves from operations. So the capital transfers, I wanted to point out that, the adopted budget is 250 down at the bottom. That's for the solar power project, battery backup solar project. But our amended budget is $1,072,000 because we had a lot of projects built up from prior years that, to the extent that they're unspent, we carry over those appropriations. It takes a while for capital to get off the ground and get completed. So we may have several projects underway that are partially completed, were partially completed in the last year. So we carried those appropriations over. And so we do the same comparison, but it's not as meaningful, again, because we're not dealing with annual budgets or annual costs. We're just dealing with sort of these capital numbers. But anyway, so I think we can look forward to some savings by the end of the year to help offset those revenue losses. So I mentioned the city administrative budget there, 153,000 variance, 93 of that is salary and benefit savings. We did have some savings so far and probably will continue to the end of the year for consulting fees. This is Alan Palermo, where we're paying him to manage a number of projects. We had initially built the budget in the general fund for having those costs captured there. But in reality, in talking with Christian and others, that it actually makes more sense to have those costs charged to the project itself in Fund 40. If we're doing an HVAC project or we're doing any kind of major project that's funded out of Fund 40, he's part of that cost, and that's where we should charge it. So we're still spending the money, but it's just going to be not in this account. It'll be in the capital transfers account. But that's kind of why I see a variance there, 153. And then records management, we did some work this first half of the year. We just haven't received the bill, so we're seeing a variance of 21,000, but we won't see that variance by the end of the year. And non-departmental, overall about $40,000 unfavorable variance. Really, it's timing. Our insurance premiums are paid first half of the year, actually in July. So by the end of the year, we'll be fine. We won't see a variance. In emergency preparedness, again, a majority of the costs are paid in the first half of the year. That'll normalize. We won't see that kind of variance by the end of the year.
Shouldn't one of those have parentheses around it? If it's,
Well, they're all unfavorable, so I didn't, the $39,000 we're overspent of $39,000 in total, and that
but the first line is unfavorable,
is unfavorable, yeah.
second one is unfavorable too?
Well, I think, isn't it the
They're just
39,000
dashes.
is the total, and these would really be
Yeah.
subcategories
Yeah,
of it?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So
So
just, because it's not
Thank you.
indented, it looks like they're all,
Right, that's what I'm saying.
yeah.
39, and what makes that up is the 21,000 of 21
Okay.
and variance of 19. They're all unfavorable in a sense. Sorry about that. So I mentioned budget amendments. Apologize for all the detail, but one of the things I do is whenever there's an amendment that's approved by the council, I track it, and I track it in the details here, which fund, and these are all general fund, but I also track it in terms of, are they one-time or are they ongoing? And you can see in the far right where it says type, all of them are all one-time. So they are coming out of reserves, they're one-time costs, and they're not sort of adding to they're not creating a structural deficit, if you will. The only one that is ongoing, as far as I understand, is the contribution to local volunteer organizations of $7,600, small dollars. But I am tracking these, and this doesn't speak to whether you have a structural imbalance or not. This really speaks to how are your reserves doing, right? Because that's always a big concern. So we started the year with a deficit of $43,000. That's because we paid for most of our capital program of $250 from our revenues. So small deficit, and then we've had all these amendments, again, almost all one time. that are going to be consuming our reserves ultimately when they're fully spent, right? So the total amendments kind of at the middle is almost 400,000. So our total budgeted use of reserves right now is $440,000, including the initial adopted budget. Our fund balance at the end of 23 is 4.2, budgeted use of reserves of 440. Our reserve for contingencies per your policy is $3 million. So that leaves reserves above policy of 774. So that number is dwindling down, right? And if you think about, okay, we're doing great on an operational basis, but if we're thinking about how are we going to pay for capital and major need, improvements that we need, you have to look to that number, and it's some money, but it's not going to, I think we were looking at $3 to $5 million of true needs over the next 5 years. So that's that's going to be your challenge. If you want to do them, if you're going to do them, how do you pay for them? Certainly not going to be out of reserves. Now, you can change your policy anytime you want and say, well, we don't need $3 million in reserves for emergencies and those kinds of things, but you don't want to bring that down too much.
Robert, do you know what, this goes back a few years, but what our highest reserve amount was, whenever that was, compared to,
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in terms of reserves above policy, I think it was in the $4 million range, $3 to $4 million range, because,
I thought it was, no, not just the absolute.
yeah, it's $7 million, I think.
Yeah, it's like that.
In absolute, yeah. I mean, right now you have 4.2, but it was probably $3 million higher than that.
So
Mostly
we
because of one-time costs, emergencies.
consumed almost half of
Yeah.
what it was.
I mean, for good causes,
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
But we have made no provision to
Yes.
replenish any of it.
Totally agree with that. And remember, and we had this conversation a year ago when we were developing the budget. Mechanically, how do you go about trying to restore reserves? One way is to get lucky and hope that revenues will, you get this huge surplus,
Count on that.
windfall, which is not unlikely. The other one is to actually program into your budget some contribution toward reserves. So it's just the amount that you say, we're going to make sure we don't spend this money and it's going to go into our reserves.
Well, we
But
might have an
we've not had
opportunity
the
this
luxury
year.
to be able to come up with that because we don't have that kind of a surplus unless you make huge cuts to the operations. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said we might have that opportunity this year based on what I understand you're showing us.
No, because I think we're going to end up with balance, because remember, shortfall revenues, savings and expenditures, I think we're not going to end up contributing much to reserves, if any. It's going to be a small amount of money. It's not going to be meaningful.
Well-
We need hundreds of thousands of dollars every year to be added to the reserves or more. And, we talked about this before. Maybe it's a matter of borrowing money to do some of your capital work. There's, spread that cost over a 20-year period. You can pay debt service on that. It's not a bad way to do that. I think there's some value to that, and it makes some sense, because if it's a 20-year project, the residents are enjoying that over the next 20 years. Why not spread the cost over 20 years versus paid and out of cash? This is important. Just always want to remind you about where we're at with the reserves, because it's an important number for us. So this is kind of speaks to the structural balancing things. This is on a budgetary basis. So the adopted budget, as I mentioned, we ended up with an operating surplus of 214, which helped pay for our capital program, because oftentimes our capital is paid out of reserves. So we really ended up using reserves on a budgetary basis of 35. We had carryovers, and then we had amendments to the budget. So we still have a surplus on our operations we have a $99,000, almost $100,000 surplus. So we're, again, going into next year on an operational basis, we should be structurally balanced. But it's just these capital transfers that are ultimately going to be consuming, when they're fully spent, are going to consume your reserves. And that's really where you have a concern. But operationally, as we develop next year's budget, I think we're going to be starting with a balanced budget, which is always good. So conclusions, revenues get into the year 200,000 below budget, shortfall. Savings and expenditures can offset that. General fund remains structurally balanced as it was adopted. And then diminishing reserves, is really the story for any one-time large capital projects we might have in the future. And that concludes my presentation.
Robert, any questions for Robert? Pat?
Well, not a question so much as a comment, but whenever, this doesn't look bad, doesn't look terrible. It's not replenishing the reserves, or much. But I know that when we talk about a shortfall in the revenue side, we tend to be optimistic about property tax revenues, maybe overly optimistic some years, thinking, oh, you know, the worst is behind us, now it's gonna go up. It didn't go up this year because we based it on a prior year where we thought it was gonna be better. So that's, you know, you're right, it's relatively stable source of revenue for us, but it also doesn't give us you know, the bump that would be nice on occasion. I'm doing what I can, I'm buying a new house. Make sure that goes into the revenue side, but I think we should be careful about the expectation that every year it's gonna get a little bit better, because it really hasn't shown. It may have gotten a little bit better year over year, but it's not gonna be enough to replenish our reserve, which is what I'm concerned about.
Yep. And I will tell you about property taxes, our growth assumptions, I think, are very reasonable. They've been around 4 to 5%, which is what it's really turned out to be. It's just that when you're dealing with sort of these end-of-year sort of adjustments, you know, we're starting off behind the curve. But 5% has been historically, if you look at the last 7, 8 years, it's been about 5% growth every year. Next year, I don't expect that, because I think we're going to be more in the 3.5% range, and that's what I'm going to be recommending, to tell you, you know, kind of tipping my hat on this, but because of the volume that went down, what we're not seeing are reassessments, you know, to market value. So, you know, a typical scenario, you have a house that somebody has owned for 30 years and it's got an assessed value from Prop 13 perspective of $1 million or less. It's worth $5 million. When that property sells, it gets reassessed to $5 million, and then you get ongoing revenue from that. And if you can imagine a lot of properties doing that, when that slows down and we don't see those reassessments, that's really most of your growth. You know, the annual increases in assessed values are only 2% max. So where does the 3% come from? It's those sales and reassessments and all that. I don't expect that to happen next year. I expect to see us at a lower number next year, which is going to put pressure on our budget. But so just to make the point that I think we tend to be reasonable about the growth assumptions. Sometimes we're just dealing with end-of-year numbers that change our projection.
B?
Yeah, I had a question on page 65 of your report. You had the COPS fund, and the last sentence said that allocated costs for supplemental law enforcement services, $53,804 at mid-year, due to delayed billings from LA County. You're talking about the LA County Sheriff's Department?
Yes.
Okay. And so are we taking all of our supplemental traffic services from the COPS fund, or are we doing some general fund to pay for those?
Yeah, I think, and maybe John can answer this better, but what we do is I think or Christian, we take 10% of the bill and we allocate it to the COPS fund. That's kind of in our approach. So if you get a $100,000 bill, $10,000 goes to the COPS fund and $90,000 gets paid out of the general fund.
You're talking about the overall law
Overall
enforcement
bill,
services?
overall law enforcement, for sheriff, yes.
Okay, so then that's our general bill. We also have a supplemental traffic enforcement bill, which is separate from that bill.
Yeah, I think it's all built into the one invoice, though. They break out the sort of normal and then all the supplemental stuff and traffic enforcement, so it's all part of the bill that we allocate 10%
I've had
to.
that same question, though. Because I swear this question has been asked before and we got different answers.
Yeah.
It's never been clear to me.
And it was an issue last year with how it was being billed, I remember the emails going back and forth with how we were billing the supplemental traffic and how we were expending the COPS funds. And I thought at the time that the COPS money was not supposed to be used, any portion of it, for regular law enforcement. I thought that it was for supplemental. And whether that supplemental is our supplemental traffic, or if we were going to do, you know, LiDAR or, you know, some things like that, that it could be used for that. But I thought we had it had been explained to us pretty clearly that we maybe had not been coding some things properly by paying some of our basic law enforcement contract out of the COPS fund. So is my understanding wrong?
So right now, we do pay traffic out of, the traffic supplemental is 100% out of the COPS fund. That's how that's getting coded. The other invoice we get on a monthly basis is divided 70/30, with 30% going
sorry.
to COPS. And we have had that conversation with Robert just to make sure, post that discussion, whether that was allowable. And thus far, we have not received any indication that it is not. So staff continues to code it at that 70/30 split as had been.
So you're taking all supplemental traffic
All supplemental traffic.
and 30% of our basic law enforcement
Correct.
is being billed to cops,
Yes.
or being debited to the to the
In my
cops
under-
account.
In my understanding is that's the way it's been done historically for many, many years.
Historically here,
Yes.
not historically necessarily,
Yeah. Yes. And, you know,
Correctly.
one could, you know, can imagine that perhaps at some point there was, because of the COPS money that came in the early 2000s, somewhere around there, that there was an expansion of services being provided by the county. Therefore, in that expansion of services, the additional services, which might have been defined as supplemental back then relative to where they were before, were then saying, well, we got an additional 30% increase in our level of services, and we're going to pay for that out of the COPS money. I think that might have been the mindset versus, you know, what you define now as supplemental today. Back then, supplemental might have been expanding services based on new funding sources coming in through COPS.
as long as I understand how it's being done.
Danny is correct.
Okay. And is there any legal requirements about that? I mean, hopefully we don't find that out after the fact, that it's not proper. I mean, for some reason, I had the same understanding
Yeah,
as Mayor
yeah.
Mersch, that it was supposed to be for
Yeah.
something extra, not the regular services.
Yeah, and I talked with Elaine, the previous city manager, and Christian, and, because I was wondering about the same thing, but again, it's just the fact that it's been done for so long that my assumption or presumption is that at some point, when the COPS funding started to come in, that the city chose to increase levels of services and paid for it with that COPS money. That would be sort of the story, that as I would understand it.
Okay, well, as long as the story is legal, that would be the important thing. You know, that we don't get any pushback and have to dig up these monies and say, oh, we have to.
I don't think you'd have to forfeit the funds. I think it might just be something that would maybe show up on an audit or something like that.
Dock her salary.
Zero of zero is zero, you know.
From our salaries.
Yeah, that's right.
VA salary.
Yeah, good luck with that, yeah. All right, okay, thanks.
Any other
No,
questions?
that was it.
Well, I'm sorry, I am going to have a few, and I don't know, and I apologize if these aren't for you, Robert, maybe they are staff questions, and we can answer, staff can answer them after you leave, not to hold you up here. I would like to make some comments, as Pat Wilson did, in that I think when we were making our assumptions last year, I remember pretty clearly that you had come in with some recommendations of revenues, and we pushed back on making them higher than what you had recommended, particularly on the property tax side. That's my recollection. And I think that one of the assumptions that we talked about was that perhaps interest rates might not impact our city as much here as other cities, that the affluence of, you know, people buying here would not perhaps be
Right.
as negative for us as others. So clearly, something has happened in the amount of turnover that there was. I think that probably to my chagrin, that maybe the interest rates had more impact than I thought they would. The other thing that I would say, when you look at those numbers, and I think it's important as we think about going forward, is when COVID happened, you know, you saw that really big jump in 2020. People were leaving Rolling Hills to get out of the state of California, going to less restrictive places, and everybody, which put some houses on the market, and people wanted to come up here because we had more open spaces and things like that. We were at a really high, we had, I think, the highest inventory that we ever had. So that was like a sea change. That was just one thing, and I don't think it's going to be that way going forward. I think we're reverting back to the other numbers in a more normal range. The same's going to go for people that are buying these properties and now making developments. You know, we're talking about building permits. A lot of those houses, the people that bought them, I mean, I'm seeing them as we go out on planning commission things. Once our inventory is historically low right now, and only so much can turn over if you have a low inventory. I think we had that one-time influx, and I think it's going to be a challenge for the people on the Budget and Finance Committee to kind of reconcile all of this and try and learn from what we did before. And I also want to thank you, and I've done this before, but I'll say it again, for the changes going from, you were early on in the move from LAIF to the short-term CDs. And I think most of us, like you say, the people that look at that like that geeky kind of stuff up there, I think we like it when we see that the city's finances, to the extent they can be, because we have so much more restrictions here than we have on what we can do with our own personal finances. But the fact that you are moving us in the same direction that probably most of us have been doing over the last year and a half, that makes me feel comfortable and good about that, so I appreciate it. Okay, so one of my questions was on cops. That's already answered. When we were talking about, on page 63, we were talking about Wildan building and building inspection, and I just want to make sure that my understanding is correct. That amount is going up because we're seeing more applicants utilizing Wildan versus the county. But my understanding is that applicants that use Wildan also pay that price. So there is an offsetting. It's not really costing the city anymore to be using Wildan. Is that
That's correct,
correct?
yeah.
That the applicants are bearing the cost of that? Because I just wanted to make
For
sure
sure, yeah.
that I was understanding that. And again, this is probably a question to staff on page 69. What are city council expenses under the city administration?
City council expenses are the monies that you allocate to the council body, which used to be higher, but we cut them back this past year.
Going to
This is for going
conferences
to
and things?
conferences
Thank you.
or your meetings, whatever it is that you may need funding for.
So do we think, and this is maybe a rhetorical question, doesn't necessarily need to be answered right now, but halfway through the year, we're already over the budget, and I keep hearing that there are conferences going on coming up. Are we keeping a close eye on that?
So
And again, you
I
can
think coming up, if I was to project right now, I believe Councilmember Wilson has the SCAG conference. And of course, always best to reserve early, you know.
Sure.
That's super helpful. I don't believe Councilmember Derringer on any of her committees has a conference between now and May, but there may be one.
Well, I guess there's the.
Or June.
The one in that the league is having for the legislative advocacy period that they're going to be pushing with Sacramento.
Why doesn't the league pay for that?
They don't pay for any of those things for individuals because the cities have to pay. That's not included in the dues. Yeah.
Okay, so I wasn't trying to put anybody on the spot on that. I'm just asking, and I realize, you know, it's only $1,000 right now, but, and I would think that the majority of the stuff, of these things, you know, we've trekked off up to Sacramento and things like that at the beginning of the year and so forth, that as the year goes on, hopefully that's I just want to make sure that we're looking at that.
I think we probably will be fairly close.
Good, okay, good.
That's
Good.
my
I appreciate
estimation.
that, because I know that we all agreed that if any of us didn't use it, ours, it could go to somebody who wanted to use it, and I know that I can think of 3 of us that haven't used anything, so I'm glad it's being used. I just want to make sure that we're continuing to look at it and abide by that. And the other legal expense,
That, from our research that we did, that was specific to the
Small cell?
telecommunications small cell.
yeah. Amazing that cost us all that money,
And
but
some of
that's what
those-
I was afraid it
Yeah,
was.
some of those monies were attributed into that legal expense other, and some were attributed into the planning budget, and I think we're sussing that out
Yeah.
staff-wise too, as to where is the appropriate place for that.
I
to
just
be.
thought that's the kind of stuff, we don't realize how much work was being done behind the scenes with legal going back and forth between the association and us.
Yeah, and we
okay,
had
so
4 or
100,000.
5 planning commission meetings on that topic.
Yes, we did. And the community organizations, contributions to volunteer organizations, is that 70, did we bring in 7,600 more than what we had in the original budget? I'm assuming this is like the Women's Club and CAB and,
Correct. So you budgeted less, you took away
Yes, and then we
monies
gave-
from
and-
that.
and then we gave
we
back.
did a budget amendment
Right.
that basically, made everybody happy.
so this, well, it hasn't made them happy yet, but.
Well, happier.
Yeah, less disgruntled. So the 7,600 is on top of the reduced amount we had built into last year's budget.
Yes.
'Cause we built-
I
we
don't-
built
I'm-
some
I'd
in,
have to
but-
check with Robert. I don't know if Robert includes the budget amendment into these numbers. That's the only.
Amendment that was just approved is not in this, because this is through December 31st, but the 7,600 is what was spent through December 31st compared to a reduced adopted budget. And so that amendment, I think it was $12,000, right?
I believe it
Yeah,
was.
so that's going to help, to the extent you don't spend all that. But certainly, I think as through the first half of the year, you're sort of slightly overspent on that account.
Well, I'm sorry that our 2 people for our Budget and Finance Committee aren't here tonight. I'm concerned that and I appreciate that we're showing that structurally, we look fine. I appreciate I think the level of detail that you give us is really good. I think it's not too detailed, but detailed enough to trigger thoughts that we might have. And I appreciate that. And I wish them good luck when you start the process, because I think we're going to have some challenges. I mean, I see things that, to me, you would have thought we should have thought about these things, like when we were talking about the trees that we needed to trim around here.
Yeah.
Even if you do it, we have to have trees trimmed that aren't part of our regular stuff. I mean, there's stuff that you would budget at home, you have these kinds of things happening. And one last question on the siren project. So I know it's capital, it's a capital improvement project, and we've had the money, we haven't expended it yet, so and I'm just gonna use 300,000 as the amount that is gonna need to be funded. I realize that's not the exact amount.
Right.
Is that, we held that money aside, that has
Yes.
not been sitting in in the general account, has it? Hasn't that been in a
Well,
CIP?
it's a little bit of
account?
both. So when we measure your reserves, about available reserves, we've already taken out the full amount of the budgeted project for any capital project out of that number. So even though it may not have been spent yet, we've already taken it out and accounted for it. So, the 750 doesn't include those dollars. Those monies are sitting in essentially the general fund reserves, and they're transferred over as needed, but we already back it out when we measure your available reserves, which is 740 or whatever that is.
So when we start, let's suppose that the project was done, well, it's not going to be done this calendar year, but we could be expending something.
will
that-
be.
Well, Well, maybe it'll be done this calendar year. Let's assume that it's done this calendar year. And there's 300,000 left that needs to be spent. Is that 300,000 that is going to be coming, that's not reflected in what's going to need to come out of our reserves?
right, that's correct.
That's sitting
Yes.
in a CIP fund?
Yeah, so if you look at
That's
the
what I
amended
thought.
budget number, down at the bottom where it says $1,072,000.
Right.
That's the, sort of the amended budget for capital transfers. So that's the cumulative of projects that were funded and unspent
Okay.
out of reserve. That million has already been taken away when we measure your available reserves.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification on that. Any, Deputy, any comments from the public on this?
Oh, come on, don't hold back.
She says, as long as I get as long as I get my LiDAR, as long as I get my LiDAR. Okay, so hearing no comments from the public, I would like to ask for a motion on this, or a recommendation.
Move to receive, file.
Do I have a second?
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Thank you, Robert. We appreciate it. Have a safe drive home.
I don't know if that's. Robert, have a great
It's
night.
fine. Receiving file, receiving the second.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was distinction with a difference, you know. We never.
A distinction without a difference.
Correct.
That's right, I didn't know if it was one.
Okay.
Receive and accept, you know.
Well, speaking of deputy and the LiDAR,
Come on down.
consideration and possible action to approve the Lomita Station Lomita Station Sheriff's Department purchase of LiDAR radar speed detection device equipment for use in the 3 regional contract.
Madam Mayor, you're jumping ahead to
Yeah.
13C. We want to
have
go to 13B.
before-
That.
Yeah, I was like, did we?
It's the ALPR, Madam Mayor.
ALPR.
You know, I kind of thought that, and I thought, no, I'm just getting old and senile. I thought when I read this that the ALPR stuff came first. 13B. Thank you for reining me in. Approve First Amendment to the Memorandum of Understanding between the 4 Peninsula cities and Vigilant Solutions for continued funding of the Regional Automated License Plate Recognition Program, ALPR. One-time camera replacement purchase, installation, and ongoing maintenance.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. Back in 2016, this council, along with your 3 sister peninsula cities, approved an MOU to purchase ALPR automatic license plate reader recognition camera systems that would be installed throughout the peninsula. That program now has gone on for 7 years, and as discussed at the Peninsula Public Safety Committee meeting in this past, say, 6 to 9 month period, cameras are failing or not working any longer, and there is a need to update the systems. And technology has also changed dramatically, and so the newer systems are able to capture multiple plates, better resolution, and whatnot. What's that?
More lanes.
Yes, that's what I mean, multiple plates in multiple lanes, correct. So, so as you see in the report, right, the ALPR allows a camera to scan numerous vehicle license plates quickly in an objective manner and compares that plate information against law enforcement databases containing vehicles of interest such as stolen vehicles, Amber Alerts, missing persons, felon vehicles, and more. The Peninsula Public Safety Committee on February 1st unanimously approved moving forward with a First Amendment to the MOU for the continuation of the program. There are newly added locations that have been added by Rolling Hills Estates and Rancho Palos Verdes over the years, but those are not part of this MOU. The MOU still maintains the same listing that you'll see in the packet. The percentage amount that was agreed upon, God bless you, back in 2016 still maintains. So you have Palos Verdes Estates contributing 20%, Rancho Palos Verdes contributing 60%, Rolling Hills Estates 7%, and Rolling Hills at 7% and Rolling Hills Estates at 13%. The total contracted amount for the upgrades, the purchase and the installation is $491,719.88, of which your percentage and contribution would be $34,420.39. I should make a notation, and the text I had written into the report, but it didn't seem to show up, is that the vigilant proposal as attached, that $491,000 number, is slightly different than the one that was presented to the PPSC on February 1st. It was, and you'll see that in Exhibit A of your packet. It'll show it at about a $474,000. There's been some, since that presentation to the two members here on February 1st, the proposal was modified slightly with additional equipment. So therefore, this number does not match Exhibit A, but before the final execution of the MOU, if this body accepts it tonight, we will make sure that that modified Exhibit A is sent to us by Rancho Palos Verdes for inclusion in that document. With that said, there were some questions, Councilmember Wilson, that you had asked in the PPSC meeting regarding competition and other vendors. I tried to address that in the contract here. There is one other competitor, but based on the evaluation done from Palos Verdes Estates Police Department, that competitor did not match up in a few different areas that was of concern to us. And I think the biggest one was that that system did not directly integrate with the current system that the LA County Sheriffs utilize within their vehicles. With that said, available for questions.
Deputy Lopez is here as well to answer any questions as it pertains to the ALPR cameras and how it assists or benefits the organization.
Thank you. B, any questions?
No, I guess I wasn't at the contract law meeting, so I'm trying to figure out what's the parallax, the difference between what they're saying the cost would be, because I can't even find a $400,000 figure on Exhibit A. It looks like it's more 617,000.
If you look at Exhibit A is on page 109 of your packet, and this is
109, oh, I have a 91 for Exhibit A.
the, that may be the previous, the 2016 version. But on 109 is
Okay.
Exhibit A for the amendment to the MOU, and you'll see the total cost there as presented on February 1st was $474,749.68. With the additional equipment, that brings up the number to the 491, as I mentioned.
Okay, so weren't they counting all, at this point, all the equipment they needed? Because this was brought, obviously, with this Exhibit A to the Regional Law Committee, so what was that a problem with the vendor not putting in everything in there? Or
No,
how did
I
that
think that my understanding is that Rancho Palos Verdes needed some additional modifications to the equipment, and that is what changed the price. So,
happen? And that's just the original equipment, not their added
right,
equipment?
right. This is not, these are not, this is only to equipment that is as outlaid within the original MOU, not to any additional camera systems or whatnot that were expanded upon beyond the MOU by the individual cities. Those are paid for directly from those cities.
I wonder if they may have had something related to needing different, and I don't know this, it wasn't discussed, but maybe something that's happening with the, down there, maybe they had to relocate on another pole or something, I don't know.
Yeah, we don't
Deputy,
know
do
the
you have
specifics.
any idea?
Yeah.
Know the specifics. I can definitely look into that and talk to their personnel.
Okay, yeah, I just wondered, it's just like another 20 grand or something, but, okay, all right, that's it.
Pat?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. What is with the blanked out screens, the
Oh,
redactions?
sorry. So staff redacted the locations
The cameras.
because we assumed that, and I don't know that the other cities did this, but we assumed that you wouldn't want to put out to the general public
Where the cameras
where
are
the
located.
cameras are.
And
Yeah,
what
that's
time the
not
sheriffs
good.
will be there, and how many there will be.
Where to smile.
And that, you know, we can absolutely provide the unredacted information to the council privately, but we assumed that it was in the best interest of public safety to.
Paul, hopefully we should contact our cities, make sure they thought of these things, but, because we certainly want to keep the equipment in place.
So another question, this is not horribly relevant, but I noticed on the original agreement, they were, the signature page has the signatures of each, the mayor of each city in the peninsula except our city, which is the city manager.
Yes, I wouldn't be able to speak to that because I was not here at that time, but considering, to your point, that I have seen, especially on some of the newer documents too, that it's a mayor and a city attorney signing, I'm asking for the mayor's signature and the city attorney's signature.
And my last question is, I know I've asked this before and probably been answered, but for the regular law enforcement contract we have, we pay 4%. For the 3 cities?
Your regular law enforcement contract with the sheriff's department. I don't know off the top of my head what your percentage breakdown is.
Right.
It's 4% for the.
That's a 3-city contract.
So how would you add a 3rd city in, and then we get raised to 7%? It seems like our percentage should be less, not more.
I wouldn't be, without doing some research, I wouldn't be able to speak to how your councils came up with the percentage allocation.
Yeah, I know, that was kind of decided, I think, more by the city managers, as I recall. They kind of worked together. Well, there was some kind of rationale they came up with as to why
The original
this
amount was 7.
needed to be, because this was supposed to be like a one-time thing, but then now, of course, where it's not really one time, but it's,
Was at RPV and was demanding that really goes to
No, it was when I was at PVE when this
same
happened,
thing.
so.
I find that City Manager Grammer from Rolling Hills Estates, having been there as long as he has a very good historical perspective on things like this when we're in staff meetings, so I can always ask to see if he,
Well, I don't see it changing, it's just,
Maybe there are different things that,
well, I don't know what it's based on. I think for the law enforcement is based on population only, and I think
Right.
this is based on other factors. I don't know how that was all stirred into the pot and when that percentage came up. It just- You would think if you added a 4th city, that would dilute our percentage rather than increase it. It was just,
yeah.
I mean, it's not a small amount.
well, I think, so camera placement may have some effect on this.
Well,
and-
again, then we only have cameras and,
Well, what I thought
say,
is we had it on 2, what I remember, we only had it on 2.
that's right.
Gatehouses. And those, yeah. And then I found out later that it really wasn't on the gatehouses, it was more like the area in front of it, so that it's more on PV Drive North, like for this one. And I'm not sure which is the second gatehouse, but in any event, they had some rationale, and it was more like announced, as I recall, that this is the way it was going to be.
I don't think it's gonna change, but I'd just like an explanation
I'll-
on how we got
I
there,
will,
so- So this doesn't happen again, where we do a coordinated project and end up paying higher
Right,
than.
because they'll say, oh, we did 7% last time, so let's do 7%.
I know.
Then, so
It
that's
went
how
from
that
4 to
works.
7, I just don't wanna see it
Yeah,
increase
I
for
know,
the
this-
next community or, community-wide project.
Right.
We'll note it and we'll make sure we go back and visit.
I would swear I read in here, they broke it down.
Well, they-
Well, I saw it just, it wasn't broken down, but there was a reference, it was based on population and 2 other factors, I forget what they were, but there was no formula, it's just,
Yeah,
sorry?
Page 91.
91?
Yeah, you break it down to area percentage, population percentage.
91?
Yes.
oh, it's the ALPR costs,
Yeah.
and then in the middle, you see,
Okay, so, yeah, population, dwelling units, area, and are these weighted in different ways? I mean, this gives you some indication, but I don't think it,
Right, and that's where I think that the question is, in other cases, if you look at the discussion we're about to have next on the LiDAR purchase, there's only 3 cities that are involved in that, and our percentage at that time is less than the 7%, when we're talking about now adding a 4th city. So I think that's where the question is, how was it determined when you added a 4th city to this type of discussion, so.
so for LiDAR, we're being asked, is it 4% we're being asked?
4% for that.
Yeah, which
That's what I'm saying.
mirrors the
Yeah,
the
so I
regular.
think that's where there's a discrepancy, and we'll have to figure out the two.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I have.
And it could be that it was more of a thing like this ALPR system would be helping peninsula-wide, and therefore it shouldn't go by population necessarily, because we're keeping doing this whole horseshoe effect of keeping, that's what I call it, like, because it's a peninsula, anybody coming in, they're being tracked, and when they go out, they're being tracked going out.
Yeah, they've got population and dwelling units and area. And so I'm not sure if those 3 things were all considered in our basic law enforcement contract. I'm pretty sure they're not.
I think it was population only. but
Yeah.
I'm not 100%
Yeah,
sure about that.
yeah. And I don't know whether it was population or number of households or what, but I think it was like only one of those, so. Any other questions, Pat? Deputy Lopez, do you have anything that you'd like to add to this conversation? Okay, well, we appreciate your coming. Hearing no other items from the public, I'll close public comment. Wishes of the council?
Yeah, motion to approve the payment out of reserves for this $34,420.39.
I know we need it, and I want to get it. It's just that on the heels of what we're already going through with our budget. I know, and what's coming up next, even though it's not a particularly big amount, this is how we keep chipping away, and I know we all know that, but I don't think this is anything that we can not have. We want our law enforcement to be able to utilize the finest that's out there, and it's been a very useful tool for them and therefore for us and the whole peninsula. So, all those in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you very much. The motion passes. And so the recommendation, approve as presented, and direct staff to return with the budget amendment, please. Any questions that you have regarding what we did? This time we were pretty clean, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now I'll go back to what I read before. This is item 13C, consideration and possible action to approve the Lomita Station Sheriff's Department purchase of LiDAR radar speed detection device equipment for use in the 3 regional contract law peninsula cities.
Thank you again, Madam Mayor and Council. This past year, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department again presented to the Regional Contract Law Committee to talk about the need for purchasing additional LiDAR radar equipment. That came last May. There was a variety of questions that were posited to Lieutenant White, who was presenting at that time, and also specifically regarding, whether Lomita would participate in the purchases for that. Questions came back. Lomita had purchased their own equipment, and so what was decided was that the 3 peninsula cities, as part of the regional law program, would participate in purchasing equipment that could be used for the peninsula. As we just discussed in the previous item, the breakdown for the total cost is $16,455.36. The apportionment to the city of Rolling Hills at 4% of that is $658.21. Back in November, this item again came before the committee. Councilmember Derringer, as part of that body, made a motion, seconded by Chair Bradley from Rancho Palos Verdes, to approve the use of the purchase. Staff, unfortunately, did not bring this item in a timely manner back to the council between then and now, and so staff acknowledges the importance of doing that and will ensure that we don't have a mishap like that again. But this item is before you to again ideally approve and direct staff to return with a budget amendment from the reserves. And I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Christian. Pat, any questions? Bea, any questions?
I guess I would ask Deputy Lopez, since she's here, have you used the lighter equipment that Lomita has versus the one that the Peninsula cities have been using, and is there a appreciable difference in the operation of that equipment?
I actually have not used any Lomita equipment.
Okay.
The LiDAR equipment that we do have at the station is very limited, which is, I guess, why this is being brought up. But it is, you know, a very simple tool to use, and it is very effective in determining like speed when it comes to vehicles disobeying the laws. But again, I have not used any Lomita equipment, so.
Does it look different than the Peninsula equipment?
I think it's the same, to be honest. Just maybe different models.
Okay.
But for the most part, they all work the same. They all have the same functions. There is nothing, you know, one's better than the other. There's none of that. That's pretty much it.
Okay, so you haven't heard any
Mm-mm.
talk within the station like, you know, my LiDAR is better than your LiDAR?
I believe, as was discussed in the previous meeting, that the Lomita equipment is specifically in cars servicing Lomita and deputies that service Lomita, whereas the Peninsula supplemental traffic or motor officers that use it check out the equipment, you know, on an as-needed basis.
Right, but they all work at the same station.
They
So
do.
that's what I'm trying to say, like, and they talk to each other, that's why I was directing that attention. So is some of the equipment just not working properly, or to your knowledge, or I'm just trying to figure out what's wrong with
I don't
it?
have an answer to, as far as I'm concerned. The equipment that's being used for like the Peninsula cities, it has been working, but I think it's just the amount of equipment that we do have for the Peninsula cities. And again, whatever Lomita has purchased stays in Lomita, so they don't share in that sense.
Yeah, I know, but they check it out when they go to a Lomita car, you know, and take it, because it's handheld. It's not something that's in a
Yeah,
Lomita car.
it's not affixed to the vehicle, yeah, it's handheld.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you for your time tonight. We appreciate it.
I know, I'm sure that budget discussion was very interesting.
No. She said, I need to go catch bad guys. I can't deal with these budgets. Thank you, Deputy. Stay safe. Hearing no other comments from the public, I close the public portion of the meeting. And B, you were asking her what was the difference. You were at the meeting when they talked about it. You must know what the differences were. You voted to bring it.
Well, I mean, I thought it was like some, they called it upgraded, so I was just trying to figure out what the upgrades were, you know, but. does it
Oh, so
seem-
that wasn't discussed when you guys approved?
They didn't go
when
into
you-
what the specifics were, they
Oh,
just said,
okay.
well, we need some upgraded equipment, the one that the Lomita has is like the upgraded version, but it didn't go into the specifics about what that meant, so
Okay.
that's why I was trying to inquire.
Okay, thank you.
As the staff report mentions, part of the upgraded, one of the features is that it actually takes photographic video
yeah.
information.
So there's license
So
plate.
you know, because I believe people can sometimes contest a radar, so it's actually capturing the vehicle, you know, in a video or stationary photo.
And it could be that Deputy Lopez is so focused predominantly on community component or community relations that she may not necessarily be out there utilizing the LiDAR gun,
Yeah.
but it's, you know, something that's certainly being utilized, it's just maybe not
I mean, obviously, we want,
talk shop.
if they don't have as many as they need to go out with the cars, maybe that's it, it just needs more quantity, but.
It's nice to see that we've come from having LiDAR and no people that knew how to use them to needing more of them. And and improved and better. So that was one encouraging thing in there. I do appreciate the staff acknowledgement about that this should have come to us before. It would have been fresher in everybody's mind. And the money could have already been included in another budget adjustment that we needed to do. Before we take any kind of a vote or move on this, I do have a question, and then you can go play drums pretty soon. On page 120, yes, paradiddle, calm down. On page 120, item number 7, this is the Regional Contract Law Committee policy, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding this, because I didn't think this group had any approval powers, that one of the reasons it was not a Brown Act meeting was because it didn't. All it did was bring back recommendations to the council. But it says here in item number 7, if the total cost of the purchase is less than $3,000, the city managers from the 3 cities may authorize the expenditure without a vote by the RCLC. So I just need some clarification on that.
So I
Please.
was, actually, had staff that developed this policy when I was at Rancho Palos Verdes. And the intent of this derived from when I was there as a deputy, that there were costs that were being made on behalf of the city of RPD up front, and they would follow back for reimbursement for the city, other 3 cities. So the purpose of the purchasing policy is that there's current language that exists in municipal codes and purchasing policies that allow city managers to be able to authorize a purchase.
Okay.
So other cities have that.
Right.
And this is just to exercise that, where you don't necessarily have to go back to council, but they can purchase it under that $30,000,
So they-
$3,000.
So they can use that. That doesn't mean that you don't still have to come to, that you, in our city, you're not making the purchase, but you're authorizing us to pay, kind of like pay back
Well,
RPV, is
so
that
other
what it
cities
is?
can actually, other cities don't go back to their council. So this LiDAR purchase, I think we're the only ones that are going back here to have this discussion with you to allow me to authorize this purchase.
Right,
That
so,
makes sense.
so Madam,
Okay.
City
Thank you,
Manager, if I may, so.
Sorry, I think
So
we got
each, so
convoluted.
I believe what Madam City Manager was saying is that, from the initial point is, you are correct, Madam. This number 7 does not bypass or supersede any local law. What Madam City Manager is saying is that they surveyed the purchasing ordinances for each of the respective cities and felt comfortable that that amount is sufficiently low enough that they would be able to get city manager approval if that city manager decided to exercise that authority. Each city treats it differently. Not every purchase, sometimes it could be a very small amount, but it's a very touchy subject. And so when I am asked that, and I won't put Madam City Manager on the spot here because she hasn't asked me that, but in other places, I will say, it's your discretion. And if you have any hesitation, bring it to the council. If it's not a time rush, bring it to the council. And so that, the way that I read that policy is just as Madam City Manager explained, that they were basically saying, hey, these purchases for these small amounts, we're gonna not require that vote by the RCLC. But as I said before, that does not supersede or take over any local purchasing ordinance, which may or may not be in existence at the time or subsequently amended by the respective councils.
And that's why hence we're actually bringing it back for the city of Rolling Hills to consider. And the other agencies were put on notice that we were gonna bring it back for your authorization this evening.
So that does not mean that in this particular type of action, that the RCLC is acting as a decision-making body?
No, it does not.
Great, I appreciate the
Sorry.
clarification on that.
response.
I should have asked the right question. I didn't ask the right question. It's my fault, sorry. Okay, what are the council's wishes on this?
I'd move to approve as presented and direct staff to return with a budget amendment.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, so I would, we've approved and presented, and staff, are you clear in the budget amendment?
Crystal clear, yep.
Thank you. All right. Matters from city council? Yes, yes, B.
I
Yes,
just wanted to
B.
make sure I didn't miss it. Okay. I have three things, and they won't take too long. One was to, again, ask to set a date for the SBCCOG dues discussion based on their vote that the COG made, and both Pat and I were there. So we need to have a discussion with our council. And then the second one,
Wait, can we
Okay.
do it, can we do them one at a
Yeah, sure,
time?
sure, sure.
Is that all right if we
Yeah.
do them one at a time? Are you okay with that? Pat, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it just needs to be added to the agenda, is that what you're saying?
yes,
At the, and at the next meeting, have they made their decision?
they did. I mean, it's going to go, well, I say basically that it's still going to go to the board, but they made the decision that this is going to be the amount of dues, and this is going to be the vote, that it'll be before the board to approve, and everyone seems to be in accord with it. So it doesn't seem like there's going to be any major discussions except from us. And so if we're going to make any arrangements to suggest a different thing, the time would be now, as opposed to waiting till that moment when everyone's saying, all those opposed, Rolling Hills, okay, you're out of here and after the fiscal year, you know.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, if I may, the vote at the COG the other night, the COG is required to give notification, 2 months notification to cities that there is an intent to raise dues. And so that's what the vote the other night basically did. And then they will come back with their budgetary process, much like ours, where those dues will be incorporated, those new dues will be incorporated into their budget. We are planning as staff to bring this item, as requested at the last meeting, back on the 11th.
Are you happy with that?
Okay, so that's our next meeting.
That's your next
Oh, okay, all right, that's fine, okay, good.
Thank you. Item 2?
Yes. Item 2 would be set a calendar date for review of the renewal contract for Fernando Barrera before the 6-month date. So we actually have set a date. So it's not going to be something that, I know staff said, well, we'll bring it back beforehand and kind of have a review of how things are going, but I think it needs to be something calendared. And that's all. And that could be just a direction to staff, if we're in accord with that, just to make sure it doesn't expire before we deal with it and extend it.
So, Karina, on our weekly meetings, when we do agenda items and stuff, you want to put in advance
I'll note it on the,
a month or so before? Would that be sufficient for you?
Yes, yes,
Thank you.
that'd be good.
Item 3?
Okay, item 3 is there is a California Public Utility Commission hearing where it's coming up, and the last hearing, so that's why time is of the essence, is March 19th, where it's virtual only, because all the rest of them are out of our area. But basically, AT&T, which services our area for landlines that are copper, are trying to get out as being the provider of landlines for other areas.
Are you sure AT&T services us and not just Frontier?
Well, because I looked it up as to they have a little chart. I put it in my address, and it looks like from the map that it's covering our area. But I didn't go and put everybody's addresses in, but it looks like it's Rolling Hills.
Not to interrupt you here, but I do believe that AT&T does not provide landline service here. I believe our company here is Frontier, if I'm not mistaken.
Frontier and Cox, to my
Well, yeah,
knowledge,
but
are
for,
the
yeah,
only two.
but for copper or fiber.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the whole, we can verify that, but it looked like we were, but this is a public safety issue, particularly for high fire districts, because there's quite a bit of pushback. Hidden Hills, for example, is pushing back seriously, because during the Woolsey fire, which primarily hit Malibu, but the only people that got notifications were those who had landlines. Because the cell service was out, the electricity was out, and if you have a VoIP connection, which is what we have here through fiber and in Cox, then if you don't have a power base to keep your phones working, you're not going to be able to utilize it, and you're not going to be able to charge those phones. So that's the issue. There's some more reasons why it's a public safety issue, but just to preserve the ability to have it, there's some residents who still have copper landlines, and so if they're not going to service anymore, then it's going to be gone. But so that would be something just to do it, but I mean, I don't know if there's a way to check on.
What's the ask?
The ask is to put it on an agenda so it can be discussed. I guess in the meantime, if you're questioning whether AT&T covers the whole city or even part of the city, I know I put my address in and it works, that the AT&T is the provider. Now, they're the carrier of last resort, which is what they're called. So it may be that they have defaulted and people agree that someone else can service it, then they end up, like I did when I went to Cox, they all of a sudden I found out later that it was a VoIP line, not a true landline. And they were trying to tell me, but there's been misinformation saying that, no, you can't get that. And this has been something that I think is important to preserve for people that are concerned and want to have. We do a lot of things where we have ability to duplicate things, so we get the word out and people have options. I think having a landline that doesn't depend on electricity, and if electricity goes out, it still works, is important.
Did you read the information that came out from AT&T, their statement regarding it was sent to all of us?
I did, but
Okay.
I don't think I think there's been some things that have been brought out later that I heard that are different than what they're saying.
I mean, it's up to you guys. If you want, we have an agreement. Anybody who wants to have something placed on the agenda can pretty much place it on the agenda. I think there are a lot of ins and outs and technicalities on this that really need to be understood, and I'm not sure that, it sounds to me like you're kind of, trying to be an advocate for something, and I'm not sure, unless we can get somebody from AT&T to come and address us, or someone from the PUC to explain this. It's pretty technical. My background is in telecommunications, and I had some questions about it,
Well,
so.
we had those presenters at the COG, and the COG members had the same not
Yeah.
clear understanding of what the issue was,
Yeah.
or issues were.
I'm actually surprised that AT&T is doing it by address as opposed to your prefix of your telephone number, because that determines the central office, which is what determines who's servicing you. So,
Yeah, they have a map where you can input an address, and it'll tell you.
yeah, right. So, but I'm surprised that they would do it by address and not by your prefix. But anyway, like I said, if you want to put it on the agenda, I would kind of bow to staff. And Pat, if you heard what they
We would have to do
did at the COG,
research.
It's
There are state bills, I think, that in recent years discuss the phasing out of copper and moving to fiber optics. AT&T in 2022 did announce that they were phasing out copper and moving into fiber optics. So we would just have to research legislation and what the plan is, and then to the point made, what is AT&T's coverage, if any, here within city limits.
And the League of California Cities is following this, so I can connect with Jeff Kiernan at the league to see if maybe perhaps he can be here to present. So if we bring it back, we'll ask him to show up and ask for the opposition.
Yeah,
But
I
guess-
have an AT&T rep who I have contact information, the same one that came to the COG, and she just called me today. And I wasn't able to take the call because I was on another line, but, so she's willing to come out and talk to us, absolutely. So that's, we have an AT&T person. But I know that this is a big issue, that Hidden Hills representatives are trying to preserve this and trying to make sure that copper lines are preserved for emergency services based on the Woolsey fire, because they're very concerned.
Yeah, and AT&T is their provider, I can understand their concern.
Right.
I'm sitting here wondering why in the hell we're not having this kind of conversation about Frontier. Frontier hasn't gone that far, but they also haven't installed fiber here, which is why when it rains, all of our Frontier people that have landlines have no service because they're still on old copper coax, so. Anyway, so direction to staff, would you like the information from Bea on the contact person that she had, or? Pat, you okay with that?
Yes, if you want to provide us with any of that, that's fine.
Yeah, Bea, if you would do that, I would appreciate it. That was 3, your time is up.
Yes. I'm willing to advocate for anyone else who wants to put up any information.
Okay, item 15A, consideration of participating in the second annual Arbor Day event at the City Hall campus on April 26, 2024.
Good evening once again, Mayor and council members. Last year, the city celebrated its first Arbor Day on April 28th, 2023. We planted a tree just outside the chambers here, adjacent to the equestrian pathway. Bennett Landscaping has again offered to do this program, not only here in Rolling Hills, but in all the peninsula cities that they service. And it will be on Friday, April 26, 2024. They will do the same thing they did last year. They will provide a tree and soil, staking, cinch ties, the labor, and 60 days of post-maintenance watering at no additional cost to the city. If the council is interested in participating again, staff will promote it in the same way we did last year. I included in your packet our advertisements in the Blue newsletter and next door. We will coordinate with the community association and different clubs this year to gain some broader outreach and awareness. One thing I do want to mention, I think there was maybe some question as to where would a tree be planted here on campus. Staff currently has designs, as had been approved by council to budget for last year from Rick Deisel for the potential re-landscaping and home hardening, if you will, of the campus. He has on those designs, and if you want, I can load it up quickly on the computer to show you, but 3 different areas. He actually has 4 areas where there is the possibility of planting a tree in his designs. We used one of them last year, so there are 3 locations that are left. One is out front here where some trees were removed in recent years, actually very near where the ribbon cutting was for the library. Another one is on the back of the campus to the right of the generator, the old generator shed. And then a 3rd location is right before the one-way bend around the community association building. The tree that they are recommending is, I think, similar to the one we planted out here, which is the Tabuia I'm going to say this totally wrong, but Impetigosa.
Tabby, I called her.
There you go, the tabby tree.
I called her Tabby.
The pink trumpet tree. So at any rate, what is really on the docket for you to decide tonight is, do you want to participate? And if so, there are timeframes of 9 a.m., 11 a.m., 12:30 p.m., 2 p.m., and 3:30 p.m. And so staff is willing to take any direction and input from the council.
Thank you. Any questions of staff?
I kind of, if there's a picture, are we supposed, you want us to pick a location tonight?
No, we have recommended locations based on a design that's going to actually be coming back to you in the next month.
Okay.
But so we have that already available to us where a tree should go. It's whether or not you want to participate in the program, and if so, at what time.
What time?
Okay, and are we getting the same kind of tree or a different tree or what?
Correct. Yes, it's the one that I just talked about, the pink trumpet
Okay,
tree.
yeah, so, yeah, I don't know what the choices were, but maybe, there'd be people wanting to have a different tree.
If there was a desire for a different tree, then staff would take council direction on that and bring it back to Mr. Bennett.
All right, okay, well,
We'd actually have to have that recommendation, though, in order to do this by the March 20,
April 26th.
I'm sorry, April. Never mind. I have made a couple of those times available on my calendar so that I can be here. It was not a particularly well-attended thing last time. Christian, thank you for being there and taking pictures. Dr. Black was there, and Kristen from the Community Association was there because we went over and asked her. I was looking for any bodies that we could get. I think Sean would probably, it's nice that he does this for us. I think he'd like to get a little bit more publicity. I explained to him last time that this is the only publicity we're going to do. We're not doing a press release for our city, that this is happening on our property. So if he's happy, if he's satisfied with just getting it in the Blue newsletter, and perhaps on our website or whatever, that would be fine. So I will make myself available, but y'all come if you can. It doesn't take that long, huh?
I'll try to be better this year. I know I couldn't make it.
Well, it's hard to make it. You know, it's like a Friday morning, and we were early last time, it was like 9 o'clock, so, anyway, so our, receive and, do we have a motion to?
What time?
oh,
And then before that, Madam Mayor, I just want the record to reflect no one's in chambers, thus why we didn't call public comment. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, I'm sorry, I should have pointed that out. I have my calendar at home of the times. I wasn't available for all of them. I think I had a couple. I might have shared them with you already, Karina, but if not, I will tomorrow. When I come in, I'll make sure I bring it. It's okay, I'll bring it.
Receive and file.
okay, second for that.
In favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so moved. Thank you
And so,
very
Madam, I
much.
just want to be sure, so Christian, you're good with that? We're going to
It's
participate?
receive and file, and we'll take further direction
Perfect.
from the mayor after her.
All right, bye.
Hey, what?
Yes, he's already packed up and gone.
I would like you to tell Jim and, are there any other items?
There can't be, we don't have a quorum, so.
Oh, okay. Well, because I only let him go because we didn't have any other items. Okay, so meeting is adjourned. And I would like you to tell Jim and Jeff that we get out of here really early when they're not.
Yes.